So today I am going to talk to you about how to turn on 3D buildings in the latest style components. Spoiler, it's very easy. And then we're going to go through some data-driven styling and show you how to do it so that you understand how to apply it to your own data sets and any map you want to make using Mapbox Studio. This will be what it looks like in the end, and they're colored by variation and height, and we can just dive right in. So if you've never been in Mapbox Studio before, you just go to the Styles tab that shows you Studio, and you click New Style. And for something that, like this map that has such colorful styling, I do recommend choosing a lighter colored map, which you can do though. You can customize it yourself in the other maps. But I do recommend starting with monochrome because it automatically already has a style called light. It's really nice to have base maps that are more muted when you're adding a lot of data or when you're planning to have a lot of brightly colored data on there. Just a quick Cardo tip. And so here we are in style components. If you worked with Mapbox Studio before and haven't been in it since December, there's some really awesome new stuff called components. Components really, they group together a bunch of data layers and let you more quickly style their different data layers without you having to go into each tiny one. You also can go into each component and quickly using little toggles or little pull down options do things much faster than if you were going into the data layers themselves to do these edits. You still can do these edits in the layers panel, which is over here, and I'll go into that in a little bit. But it's just much faster if all you want to do is quickly throw together a map and add a few data points. You don't have to think about styling every single data layer, so it's a much smoother process if you want to make a map in 10 to 20 minutes. The road network is a particularly good example of how many data layers exist within some of these components and how the relationship works. So you can choose different colors for all the different elements in the components, and you can add them here within the color palette. So if I had the roads color right there and zoom in to San Francisco, instead of like you used to have to do editing every single road layer, which is like 50 or more layers, all you have to do is just click one and all of them change, which is pretty fantastic. So that's really a brief overview of what the components are. And I'm gonna go ahead and go into the color palette and remove that just because I don't want it for the future map. And just to quickly explain layers, layers are grouped by the components that they're in. They are named first by the component, so place labels, and then by what's in the grouping, which these happen to also be place labels. If you scroll down the layers, you can see that there are different road network groupings, and they contain more specific groupings, just so you know where to look when you're going into the data layers. And I'll go into customizing those further in a little bit, but just to have a little bit of background. So what you all came here for to initially see is how to turn on 3D buildings. In components, it's super easy. You don't have to go into the layers at all. All you have to do is click on buildings and then toggle on 3D buildings, and they turn on right away. You don't have to mess with too many things, so you don't have to think too much about the different height values you want to add. All you have to do is add 3D buildings, and they're all set up right away. And then if you want to see what they look like at a different pitch, all you do is move this around to see what it looks like turning, and then you just kind of like can move your mouse up and down to change the angle. And if you're on a trackpad, you can just use your finger. It does the same thing. So that's just a really nice, quick way to show off buildings in a different way if you haven't used it before. So the next thing we're going to dive into, as I previously mentioned, is how to do data-driven styling using buildings as an example. And I'm gonna go to Madison, Wisconsin, because it's one of my favorite cities, and it's where I was going to be this weekend. So I want to visit it on the map and show you buildings there. And it also is a really interesting juxtaposition against other spaces once we style all these based off of height, because Madison actually has a city ordinance where buildings can't be taller than the Capitol. So it's a nice, really a nice height analysis and comparison compared to other cities where things are different. So before going into styling, I do want to have a little discussion on how the data works, because in order to style each data layer, you do need to understand the data layers if you've never been in here before. So what's really nice is you can figure out the attributes in different ways. You can click on the map to see what component any given piece is in, and you also can see the specific data layers by clicking on layer. And all you have to do in this window is click on building extrusion, and it'll take you to that data layer. And if you want to see the data attributes of that data layer, you go to select data. And this window is going to show you only what data exists in that data layer, which is really nice. So you know you're only looking at what you're curious about. And then you click on that and you look at the building data layer, which is what we're looking at here, and can see the different attributes. So the attributes that exist in this data layer are extrude equals true, which just means that 3D is turned on. Does it have anything underground in terms of the data? Like, will it show underground data? In this particular case, it does not. And height, which is what we're looking to use. Obviously, we already know height is being used because I told you, but this is a really great way to explore any data that you didn't put on the map to see if there's anything that you want to change in order to display it a certain way. And there is, besides this, if you just want to look at an entire data set or tile set, like the entire streets tile set, you can do so by clicking out of styles, going to tile sets, which is this tab right here. You scroll to whatever data layer you want to look at, which these are all the Mapbox tile sets, but you can scroll further for your own data sets if you forgot the name of some attribute. We can check out Mapbox Streets as an example here. So within this tile set, here you see the tile set ID if you ever need to pull it into anything in terms of styling. But the layer details is where you can see all the attribute names, as well as if it has different data layers within it, like Mapbox Streets does, then it'll show you that, as well as what data type it is, whether it's a point, line, or polygon. And with Mapbox data, you also can see descriptions of the attributes. So that's really useful. So I just wanted to show you that so that if there's other data besides buildings that you want to style, you can explore the attributes and figure out what they are. But now we'll just go back into that style to start using data-driven styling. And just going to go back to Madison again. I didn't save it, which is why it went back to San Francisco. So that's my bad for not saving beforehand. I apologize. You can save by hitting publish. So we'll just pitch this again and go to the data layer. So in order to change the color or any other piece, we have to override it. Overriding is something that exists because of components. As I mentioned earlier, the components are all grouped together and have a relationship with each other, so that when you change something in the component, it kind of changes across different data layers. If you want to customize something a little more, you can override it and quickly change the color. So I changed the color here to blue, and you can do this with every other piece of, every other element in the data layer you can override. And if you don't like an override and want to make sure that it's in the component system again, you can hit revert and you're good to go. If you want to edit a lot of pieces of a component, you also can eject it. Say you want to edit every single road layer and you don't want to click every override, you can eject that entire component, but just be aware that if you eject it completely, that it won't go back into the component system like override allows for. So if you're only doing a few custom options, I definitely recommend utilizing the override instead. So the means in which you can use data-driven styling within this area is these four options. You can style across the zoom range, which is really useful for if you're planning to have a lot of interactivity in your map. It's good to consider each data layer and how you're planning on showing it at different zoom levels, because at lower zoom levels, or when you're really zoomed out, it might not matter to have as much detail, and that it is really helpful to style based off of zoom level so that maps at lower zoom levels, or when you're really zoomed out, aren't super cluttered.
I have a question.
Yes.
I'm busting in here. And maybe this is a question for the folks who are closer to customers, but Vanessa, like, why do people use 3D buildings? Like, they're cool and people use them like in games and other platforms, but like these styles, like what's actually the use case? Like, why do people like this? Why did we put all the work in to make 3D buildings just like a toggle switch? Why do people do this?
I don't know if Scott.
Scott.
I know that it's really useful for different customers, for example, real estate. It can also be really useful for tourism, or so salient landmarks are a landmark that is really recognizable, and humans, for the most part, are really used to navigating based off of what they see rather than memorizing exact addresses. So if you're trying to navigate or have reference around a certain area, it's really useful to have 3D buildings if it adds to your map and it works for the design, because then people have another means of referencing something besides just a layer. That is my cartographic opinion, but also Scott or Todd may have.
Yeah. Other use cases I've heard of customers when having backend support dashboards and ride hailing or delivery companies is to actually allow them to, understand the topography or the cityscape under which their customers are engaging with their end users. So picking up someone on the street, right? Are they in dense urban landscape? Are they outside of it? In the event, sometimes some customers are having GPS issues with locating or having spotty service. It also gives them indication of what may also be happening in the area. So for two different use cases, also for food pickup and drop off, also helpful to understand if you're trying to locate the centroid of a building versus a doorway or parking lot, can give people context beyond just a flat vector map or a satellite imagery.
Does that answer your question, Dom?
Yeah, thank you.
No problem. And then, well, I'll go to the more complicated one last. You can also use a formula. Formulas do require you just to be a little more familiar with how to use Mapbox, and you can read documentation on how to use the formulas. But they're really great for doing something a lot more targeted. And then data conditions, styling with data conditions means that you're styling based off of a particular condition, and it can be thematic, which means it's not necessarily numeric. It also can be numeric where you're pulling something based off of numbers. But if you want to style based off of if the attribute is named apple or orange, then you can pull that and not have it just be based off of a number. And that's called thematic mapping, and is really useful for choropleth maps. If you know what choropleth maps are. Those are essentially, like you see election maps all the time. Those are choropleth maps. And that would be like you're pulling a data condition based off of Republican, Democrat, Green Party, etc. And then styling across a data range is what we're going to use here with height. And a data range is exactly that. It's a range of numeric data, and it can be a lot of different ranges. It doesn't have to be 0 to 100, but styling across a data range is useful in this case because the data is continuous, because height exists from negative values, so that's underground, to positive values. So we're going to style across a data range and use height. So you click select the attribute that you want to style off of, and when you're in this menu, the height value will pop up as the lowest value that exists in your data field. So in this case, the lowest is 0. And the other value that is underneath it, it's showing the highest value. So the highest value in this data set is 1500. And building data in Mapbox data is in meters. And also pointing out that approximately one level or one story is about 3 meters tall, and that's relevant to how we're going to style this. It's always important to understand the data sets that you're using. So this is just an example of making sure that when you're using any particular data set, when you're pulling stuff into the map, make sure you're understanding it a little bit so that you know how you want to style it so that what you're doing is accurate and appropriate for how you're representing it. I have to say that as a cartographer because it's important to represent the right thing when you're mapping. So I want to make this white to represent nothing, 0. And to change the color, you can use this little color toggle. You also can choose particular values here, but I'm just going to use the toggle to make it white. And then you can add another stop by clicking add stop. And I want to make this value represent something that we're used to seeing in the real world. I mean, we're all used to seeing all different heights, but something that we can comprehend. So we've all seen 2-story buildings, like a building with an attic. So that will be about 7.5 meters tall, I think. So that 3 meters represents 1 story. So that's like 2.5-story building. And I'm going to make this red. And as you can see, it changed immediately on the map. I'm also going to go ahead and override the opacity here for the use of our map. The opacity that it is now is really useful for general reference and being able to read the rest of the map, but the focus is the buildings for this particular use case. So I'm going to make it 95%. So now we can see them a lot more strongly. And go back.
Vanessa, when you're done with this next example, I have a few questions for us that came in, but continue with this and then we'll take a break.
Okay, great. So now we can see the buildings that are similar to 2.5 stories tall are going from white to red, and everything in between is pink at the moment because it's a gradient. So I'm going to add 2 more colors. So we're going to go for a sort of dark blue. And this is going to be 100, which is going to represent a 33-story building. So office buildings that we're kind of used to seeing, not the tallest skyscrapers. And finally, the last one will make a catch-all of a really bright blue, and we'll make it catch-all with 101, so just above office buildings that I'm saying are office buildings. And here you can see in Madison that, like I said, most buildings are not that tall. They are following genuinely the regulation of not being taller than the Capitol building, except for this building right here. And it really does make for a nice skyline. If we move to New York City and zoom in. Oh, I might have scrolled real fast and zoomed in too far. Woo. You can zoom in really far, like I just did. But if you go to New York City, you can see right away that there is a lot of distinct height difference in that city. And I'm sorry, I scrolled a lot. My internet, I guess, was not catching up very quickly. But as you could see, there was some major differences. And also it's showing the gradual differences because it's currently a linear rate of change. That means that there's a gradient in between each color range. And if you want to just show stark differences and not see the buildup between them, you can change that to step. And this will only show everything between 0 and 7.5 is white. Everything between 7.5 and 100 is red. Everything between 100 and 101 is blue, and 101 and up is that light blue. All right, ready.
I think you answered some of these questions, but DJM2 said, is it possible to set a building color dynamically using JS API?
Yes, you would be able to do that using JavaScript. You would have to be working with the style JSON itself, but you could change it within the code, no problem. And in order to download the style JSON, sorry, you just go to the share button and download the zip file. And in there, there's a style sheet JSON, and you go into the style sheet JSON and you can like change the color there. It is like slightly more complicated than what I just said, but yes, it's possible.
Excellent, thank you. And the follow-up question to that was, is it possible to hide buildings except one dynamically using the API use case? They want to highlight one building, again, dynamic, depends on the user settings.
I think that as long as there's an attribute that is separating that particular building, those particular buildings, as long as the data has an attribute for you to be able to pull from it, then yes. The data has to have the attributes to allow for that though.
Thank you for that. And I'm looking for the next question that was asked by someone. 1 second. I'll come back to it in a moment once I can find it in the thread.
Okay. All right. Okay, so.
And of course, I found it right when you start. So the other question from Emma Energy is, I want to know how to add custom building that we designed in Unity 3D and Mapbox.
I haven't worked with Unity, so I don't know how to answer that specifically, but if it's a data layer and a tile set, then all you have to do is add that through this little plus button, and you can upload data directly in this window, as well as the other tile set window that I showed earlier. You also can add a tile set by ID, and I'm happy to answer this more in depth. If you just, you can like @ me at Twitter, and I'm happy to get you a more in-depth response to that as well.
Mm-hmm. Scott, would you drop your email in the chat? And that way anybody who reaches out to you, you can route that. Yes, and also John Brannigan came in and gave a great response in the chat to that question about Unity with specific step-by-step recommendations. So very cool. We got you.
Those are the 2 questions so far.
Cool. All right, then I am going to go ahead and kind of pivot away from 3D buildings as a sort of basic introduction of data-driven styling and show in a different style. We can use streets as an example. Kind of explore how other pieces of data have styling options and data-driven styling options. In particular, I want to discuss point data and relative to symbology, because I think that's really useful, because a lot of points of interest or city layers is something that you can quickly customize on a map and make it yours. If you want to show a map that is about tourism, for example, maybe you only want to show points of interest that relate to tourism. And maybe for your use case, if you're a tourism business, for example, you only want to show general restaurants, monuments, and museums, and that's it. That's your target audience of tourists. And maybe you like have a bike, rentable bikes where people can bike to those. So I'll show how you can filter those really quickly, and I'm going to go to Washington, D.C. Because that's where I live, and all those things are very bikeable for this business that I just invented. All right, and I picked streets because streets is a great style option out of the box. It shows, of course, streets and all their names, as well as road signs if you're driving around. They're also really useful just for reference. If you're not driving around, if you're someone who doesn't have a car like me, it's still useful because there's salient landmarks and are things you can use to navigate. So, well, how do I know what a point of interest is, Vanessa? Besides that, there is a component in here. You also can, like I said before, click on something and check out the data layers in there. Now, first I'll show you how you can customize this within the component system itself before diving into how you would do it in the layers. So in the point of interest component, you can control the density by category. This means out of all the point of interest labels, you can customize it all on your own in the point of interest without doing the data-driven styling in the data layer yourself. If you know that you don't want any buildings, you don't want commercial services or education, but you want all the food and drink places, but not stores like grocery stores, no historic, or yes to historic, no industrial. Landmark's pretty great for tourism. Lodging is related, but not for this map, but it could be related if depending on what kind of business you are. I like parks when I am being a tourist, so I'll also up those. And some churches are really cool. All the religious spaces are very beautiful to go to when you're a tourist anywhere. Visitor amenities, important. So now just by quickly dragging those, I have already customized the point of interests layer and data pieces on this map. But if I wanted to just do it on my own and kind of customize it a little more, then I could click on any point of interest, go to layers, go to the POI label, and go into any of these and override it in order to show what I want. If I wanted to filter it specifically, I don't want to inject it. So what I recommend doing here is duplicating the layer. I don't want to eject it because I personally like having things in the component system in case I want to go back. And you can duplicate something and turn off the layer that, using this little toggle, you can turn it off in the component system. And then if I want to customize it and change the filter, so this is really a more complicated formula that had a lot more thought put into it in terms of different zoom levels and how it was going to be displayed in specific densities. So if some places have higher ranking in terms of people's awareness, like the White House, it's ranked a little higher than other areas. So that's this formula. But I'm gonna go ahead and delete this in this layer that I copied because I just want to show very specific things. And I don't need to be that detailed of a filter. That's what I'm saying right now. So I'm going to create the filter by going in and remembering that, oh, I should click on a data layer and see what I need to pull. So in this here, I need to pull the attribute class to get park-like or anything else. So create filter, class, and then here I can show exactly what I just did before in terms of pulling it back and forth, but I'm not gonna be thinking about densities right now. Now I'm just gonna show all of them. So I don't want food or drink. I did want visitor amenities. I wanted park-like, food and drink, which is restaurants. I want historic, religious. I'm trying to remember everything that I said I wanted before, but that's good enough for now. And now every type of visitor amenity, everything that's park-like, every food and drink place, everything that's historic and everything that's religious is now on this map. And I just filtered it, and these are all conveniently still styled appropriately because in Mapbox data, they have reference pieces that let them have Mach-E icons here. And then it's still associated with the way that it's colored based off of that data layer because it's still something that we copied. So if I wanted to adjust the way stuff was colored, I could go into the color in this POI label and change the color here by clicking and overriding particular pieces. But I'm not going to do that. I actually want to clear all of these.
And I have two questions that came in when you get a break.
Oh yeah, now it's good.
The first one from JamOS1 is it possible to upload customized JSON file to this layer? For example, I have some material info for buildings and I want to show them as a color in this layer.
You can, I guess I'm not sure if you want it to be uploaded in particular as a POI labeled united with this one. I'm not sure if that's the question. You can't do that, but you can upload your own data and JSON and make it your own POI layer, if that makes sense. And that would just be going and uploading it through add new layer, upload data. And we don't have an example, but then all you'd have to do is, for example, if you uploaded your own tile set, let's pretend Mapbox Streets is your tile set, and then you go to place label and then style, you would have these data layers, and it would display, you just have to style it based off how you want to style it. So these little circles are those data layers. And then if you wanted to have it have specific symbology relative to the points and not just be points, you go into the type data layer and make it a symbol. And this will allow you to have a label as well as a point relative to it, which means that you can add custom icons to it. So you need, when you're doing the symbology option, which is really powerful and awesome, and I wanted to talk about it anyway, so this is a nice intro to it, then you can go in and pick whatever one you need to pick for name, which in this case is name, and then you can use data-driven styling to select icons, and you can upload your any custom icons you want as well. If you want to have custom icons for your building data set, I think you said it was, you just go ahead and upload it here in the image tab here, upload images. And once you upload it, then you can look for your icon image and search. And if I search for park, for example, it's going to show me everything that has that in the name. But just as a quick example, if I want to style, I'm actually going to change this from place label to a POI label, so there's more of it on the map that we're viewing. All right.
And as you work through this, we have 2 questions left in about 7 minutes, Vanessa.
Okay. So then you can quickly choose class. If I wanted to, like just referencing what I just talked about in terms of class, if I want to style the food and drink a particular way and make them all have fish icons or aquarium icons, that would be what I did just there. And now all of the food places have fish icons. At least they should. Oh, this is turned off right now. Anyway, that's the way you would do it. I mean, this looks really bad. It needs to be designed, but that is how you would start. Okay, next question.
Yeah, it's great. I think this is a kind of good follow-up. So are there any links to documentation that explain how the size of my own custom point data, which I have custom icons, SVG files, at different zoom levels? So example, I haven't been able to get the size of my icons to show up well at different zoom levels.
I do believe there is some stuff written in our blog on how to best display icons. I don't know off the top of my head, but that is definitely something I can send your way. So if you can email that question to Scott, I can get it to him and get it to you.
Excellent, thank you. And I've done it myself, so we can point to that documentation. And then the question came in from Tam. Can I highlight some buildings base on my custom data set? For example, I got some places visited by users and want to show it on my map by different colors. Maybe you can provide a link to the documentation so I can read about it.
Yeah, sure. I definitely can provide a link to that as well. And again, if your data has an attribute where you can pull from it, like that is really easy with styling with data conditions. Like you just would pull based off of the name.
Thank you for that. Why only 7 minutes left? Someone asked, because I guess that's the time frame for this lunchbox. So we have 5 minutes left, proceeding forward.
Okay. All right. So while we're while we're discussing this symbology layer, I do still want to go over some parts of it. So that's great that someone asked something that led into it. I am going to show you how to, you know, style it so it looks a little better than its initial display. So you can, in order to make the typeface and symbology work together, you need to go into text, icon, position, and placement, those little layers within the data layer, and make it the typeface size you want. Obviously, it would be useful to filter out the data so that it only is the data that you want. So maybe I should only filter out, what did I style here again? I already forgot. I styled, oh, food and drink. So I'm gonna actually go ahead and filter out everything else and only select food and drink here so that those viewing only are seeing what we're talking about. All right, so now the visual clutter is far away, it's gone. Always recommend making sure that whatever you're styling, just make sure it's the data that you actually want to display, because then you're not worrying about it and like trying to figure it out when it doesn't even matter. So I'm going to change the color of this typeface to something a little less clashing. I personally really love these restaurants that are showing up. So I'm going to make this font bold so it pops out more, because I really want people to know where they are. Then I just really like, I mean, I do recommend if you were going to do something to make targeted icon use, but we'll pretend these are all restaurants that have to do with fish. So I'm not going to change that. Next, in order to get the symbol and the typeface to have a relationship that you want, you need to go into the text anchor, and the text anchor option shows where the symbol is relative to the text. So that's what the anchor means. The symbol is an anchor and the text is kind of following the anchor. And there's a nice little visual to show you how it'll move when you do that. So centered is how it starts as a default position, and then you can choose, and you can again use the data conditions to style it in a more particular way. If you know that some parts of your data have longer names, for example, maybe you wanted to have it facing in a certain way compared to the other, like left to right, or if you just want to create some variance, you can use the data conditions to do that. And then there is still a little bit of overlap with the symbol and the data layer. So there are a couple options that you can use to adjust that. So you can use the text offset, which lets you offset both in the X and Y position as you choose. So you can do it in
with
negative.
About a minute left or so, just kind of wrap up your final thoughts. Hate to cut you off.
Oh no, that's fine. So you can do positive or negative, left to right, as well as the Y position, and this will make it have somewhat of a gap, and I'm going to center it on top because for these symbols it makes a little bit more sense. And that's how to quickly style the position of it. And I do recommend exploring the placement option in the future. It's really useful to go ahead and explore as you can, like make dummy maps and data and figure stuff out, because a lot of design is figuring out what works in different softwares and what doesn't for yourself.
Yeah.
Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Hope you learned something new. And as of course, our emails are there. Reach out if you have any questions. We're happy to help you, point you to documentation, or answer your questions. It was a pleasure, even though we couldn't see you.
Yay. And Vanessa, I just have to read this one to you. Somebody said, thanks for the shout out. Wait, where's this one? They said, oh my God, she's such a good educator. Why only 7 minutes? Crying emoji. From
I really
Emma
appreciate
Energy.
that.
Yeah, man, this was great. And I love you taking it up to the last minute with the styling, because this is like, it's so obsessive. It's like, it is possible to get it more and more and more perfect.
Yes, I mean, you could spend days and weeks on it. I have.
Ooh, and give a plug for Creative Carta. When's the next one on Sunday?
Oh yeah, Creative Carta is actually this coming Sunday. It is at 2 p.m. Eastern. You can join in from wherever though, because it's always been online, which is really convenient now. You can join in on Twitter via the hashtag Creative Carta, or join the Slack channel. You don't have to be a cartographer. It's just called that because Carto maps fun. I started it a year and a half ago with some friends, and it kind of grew, and just a lot of people joined to work on their projects, to do stuff that they put off. It's really also just nice to have a community to ask questions to share your projects, to ask questions, and that's what it's for. So you could practice making a Mapbox map during Creative Carta on Sunday if you wish.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Vanessa. Thank you, Scott. Great job moderating. And thank you, Todd. Great job moderating in the chat. Have a good rest of your day, everybody. Wish Vanessa's sister a happy graduation on Twitter. Yes. And stay well. We'll see you next week.
Bye.